Jim, before we get to some songs and get out of here real quick, let me grab this. On the topic of retro wrestling figures, because we haven't done this in a little while, Hastel Toys, their gimmicks and grapplers and gimmicks, line, has put out a few figures recently of some interesting gimmicks from the mid-90s in the WWF. Want to get your thoughts on them real quick. First figure here is a figure of Jean-Pierre Lefit. Jean-Pierre Lefit, with his finishing move, the Cannonball Clobber. What did you think of the repackaging of Pierre as Jean-Pierre Lefit?
Well, they used that at some point in between, what was it? In between, could have been in between the Mountie and what am I thinking of? Because he went through a couple of different gimmicks, but at that point, they wanted him to be a pirate, right?
Well, this is Pierre, who was in the Quebecers with Jacques Rougeau, and then he disappeared. He came back as a pirate, and then I don't think he came back again until he was in the Amazing French Canadians, maybe, in WCW.
But Pierre was a heck of a, and still, he's been working in recent years in TNA and other places, the monster gimmick, right? And he's, bless him, he takes wonderful bumps for his age, but he was a good talent, but I think he was easily led astray by, remember, I think the locker room had him convinced they were going to put the belt on him in Montreal, and he didn't want to do a job for fucking Nash and all this other stuff, and it led to ill will. But yes, Jean-Pierre Lefit was going to be the pirate. He was, you know what? That's something you don't hear enough these days. Also, is about swashbucklers. Think about that. Used to be all the swashbucklers were the heroes, the Douglas Fairbanks seniors and the Tyrone Powers and the swashbucklers. It's a phrase you don't hear enough of these days, swashbuckling.
Was it as simple as he had one eye, so Vince is like, you must be a pirate?
I think so. Yeah, he was blind in one eye. So it did. But you know what? The thing is, they should have ribbed him and told him to wear the patch on the other eye just to change it up.
Jim, here's another interesting one. Of course, Savio Vega would become a popular wrestler in the WWF, and actually, I thought he was quite underrated. He had some good matches with Steve Austin and did some good stuff. But what about Quang? Quang, with his finishing move, the Orient Chop. What do you remember about the gimmick, the masked Quang?
Well, again, Savio was a hell of a worker. And Savio, that's when he was in TNA as an agent, it was because he had been an agent and booker and office personnel in Puerto Rico. He and Dutch knew each other well. And he, besides for his very strong accent, which was challenging at times to get to the bottom of it, shoot him, who's him? But he knew what he was doing. And I liked Savio Vega as a gimmick because he, like you said, had good matches with Austin, who wanted to work with him because he knew that Savio was helping him get over. The Quang thing was when they were just trying to find shit to do with him. And he did know some martial arts, but it was to me, a pale imitation of, do you remember the TNT gimmick and the videos they did?
My first exposure to him was seeing pictures of TNT in the magazines from Puerto Rico.
In Puerto Rico, his original gimmick, or the one he came to be known by first, was TNT. He was a masked wrestler, but he did martial arts, and they did a video of him, at least one I remember. It was so cool to where it looked like it was a Puerto Rican James Bond movie. And he was the secret, fucking martial arts agent going around fucking leaping over these cars and doing all this cool looking shit. And Quang was just kind of clang to me. But that was years later.
All right, Jim. Well, Hastel, with their grapplers and gimmicks, recently put out a line of Charles Wright toys, including, of course, Papa Shango, The Godfather. But what are your thoughts on Kama? Kama, the finishing move listed here, the Kama Crush, and it comes with a gold chain. What are your thoughts on Kama?
I think Kama should have been done away with, exclamation point. No, that was the thing is, and By the way, they should have come up? Did they do Soul Taker?
They did not. They only did the WWF gimmicks, or at least some of them. Actually,
they ought to do his whole line. Think about this: you could keep a toy company busy for a year and a half if they did a figure of every one of Don Fargo's gimmicks. But no, with Papa Shango, under Kama, etc. The Kama thing just didn't work. The Godfather was the best because that was closest to the person. But Kama, Vince didn't understand that was the early days of UFC. They were trying to present him as some kind of MMA fighter, which he's a fighter, all right, but I don't know if the Gracie family has anything to worry about.
And there had just been a fighter that got a lot of attention called Chemo in the UFC. So it was right after Chemo, there was Kama.
Right, and Kama, Chemo, Uma, Oprah. But he was bland. It didn't, the outfit, it didn't fit Charles Wright. It didn't fit Bear. So I think the initial early, Papa Shango was all that showbiz bullshit and everything. And Kama was just there, but the Godfather finally blossomed. But Kama was not the jewel of his gimmick canon.
Other than the tattoos, you would have no idea it's the same guy as Papa Shango. And when you think about it, the Godfather looks nothing like Kama, and Kama looks nothing like Papa Shango. Soul Taker had facial hair and hair. So his look kept changing. But one final one here, Jim. A tag team set. Marty Jannetty and Al Snow, the New Rockers. With the Cassidy Crunch and, of course, the Rocker Dropper, the Chuck Austin special.
What the fuck? Why do they keep making up these names? Because these guys, they never won a match, so they didn't have a finish. But even with the guys that had finishes, they weren't clobbers and crunches. And that was at the time Al Snow had come into a lot of fanfare from myself, Jim Ross, other people that knew him. But he tried to do that springboard shit on real ropes instead of cables and fell the first time Vince saw him, and he was doomed from then on out. And they made him Avatar and all this other shit, and they were trying to figure out shit to do with him, and Jannetty was in pretty much the same situation. When Shawn Michaels had been at the Night of Legends in Knoxville for Smoky Mountain in August of 95, Jannetty was booked on the card against Al Snow in a Midwest title match. And Shawn and Marty hadn't seen each other in however many years at that point, but they got back together that night. Shawn put a word in for Marty, and they rehired him, but then they didn't know what to do with him. So when they've got two guys they don't know what to do with, they made them a tag team. And because Al could do spots and was athletic, the New Rockers. Well, what do we call them? Again, it was a fucking... Vince didn't give a shit. Bruce is just trying to tickle him. What are we going to call Al? How about Al Snow? Well, no, the Rockers. So they came up with a compilation of two teeny bopper idols. This was 1997, and they went with Leif Garrett and Sean Cassidy. Leif Cassidy.
Not David Cassidy?
The Rockers. Not even David, but Sean.
All right. That's an interesting little twist there. Did Al Snow need to be goofy? Like, was that the only way Vince was going to put up with it? He wanted him to show personality and be a character there? Or if they had done the New Rockers as a serious thing without Leif Cassidy being a clown character?
Well, no, Vince never said be goofy, but would you put him in a goofy outfit with a goofy gimmick and send him out there to have goofy matches? Al started being goofy. Because he was like, well, what the fuck? I'll get noticed or fired, one or the other. But it was rotten. That was the babyface equivalent of the new Midnight Express. That was just fucking rotten. Fucking rotten.